The only thing they can't do is sit there.
It is a pleasure to introduce this plenary session today. It is now being recording, and I am introducing Rashika Wells and Adrian Cowell. Rashika is a consultant physician and also a digital development lead in the School of Medicine. And Adrian Cowell is an innovation lead in the School of Medicine. And they've been working on a Digital Innovation Fund funded project in collaboration with the DML, which is preparing future doctors and using 360 virtual reality to do so. I'm looking forward to hearing more. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand over.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So my name is Rashika Wells, as Andrea mentioned. I'm a consultant at Imperial NHS Healthcare Trust and also the Digital Development Lead Phase 3 for the School of Medicine. I have with me Adrian Cowell. Thank you so much for inviting us to talk today. We're going to be talking about 360-degree virtual reality simulation, and you'll also have a chance to go as well. So a little bit of background. We started with a problem. So it's always been a difficult balance because we know that doctors must be able to manage emergencies. And so by that inference, medical students must also be able to manage emergencies or have some experience in doing so. So managing emergencies, obviously there's the sort of textbook protocol type things which you can argue, you can read about. But there are non-technical skills, so the ability to recall things under pressure, to remain level-headed, and other non-technical skills, teamwork, leadership, communication. The difficulty is the emergencies, they occur at random. Nobody can, no medical school can guarantee that their students will see all relevant emergencies firsthand in person. And emergencies often occur out of hours. So even if you are the most diligent medical student in your year group, you may not see very many emergencies. And certainly when we've taken a head count of our year 5 and year 6 medical students, about 10% have seen firsthand things like cardiac arrest and life-threatening asthma, for instance. So it's not that many. If they happen to be at that place at that time, then nobody is going to pause to teach them. Obviously, priority is given to the patient. You just go through the emergency. So students are often sidelined. And actually, if you listen to many students, some of them have been shimmied out of the room. So it's probably not really a massive surprise then that our students have felt underprepared for practice. And this has been reflected in national training surveys as well, where we didn't do very well. So simulation and simulators are really effective. So they're used across many industries to prepare people for everyday events, emergencies. And probably the best example of this is in aviation. So these simulators are very sophisticated, very effective, very realistic. Pilots can be trained on these simulators. They're certainly examined on simulators very frequently. It does come with a very heavy price tag, and it's not something we can really reproduce in higher education. So instead, we use in-person simulation. So in-person simulation involves bringing in, an actor, a few actors, have a facilitator, and then students maybe in a, classroom setting or a sim lab. It's also very effective. It has a cost, and these costs are repeated costs. So every time you do a simulation, you need those actors, you need those facilitators, you need that room space. And, in Imperial, we do have in-person simulation. Typically, we might take 2 students with 2 facilitators for an hour. And our medical school year groups are about 350 to 400 students, which if you think about taking 2 students through, that's quite a mammoth task. If you sort of extend it into a bigger group, like, group of 6 students, then often 4 of them will be watching, whilst 2 of them will be participating. So it's not the greatest experience for the ones watching. So it's very workforce and timetable intensive. So what we really needed was something that marries the 2, so takes the best elements of both. What we needed was something that's immersive and realistic, but also accessible and scalable. So we developed 360-degree virtual reality simulation. It's a photo of some of our students having their sessions. So what's unique about this? So it's realistic. So we value realism. We want the students, when they see this, when they qualify as a doctor, to feel that they have seen this before. It's not the first time they're seeing this life-threatening asthma or epilepsy or diabetes. So we use 360-degree filming of a real life acted scenario. And then it's delivered immersively through virtual reality headsets. So we have 60 virtual reality headsets, and we take students on their emergency medicine rotation. So they're in groups of 60 already, and we do those sessions for 60 of those students. The scenarios are interactive, so we've tried to make them so that the students aren't passive members just watching. We do this through breaking the fourth wall acting. So any of you who've watched, I think The Office does it, but certainly things like Miranda have breaking the fourth wall acting, where they turn and look at the camera and say something. So we've scripted it in such a way to use breaking the fourth wall acting. So when the students put on the VR headset and the actor turns to camera, it's like they're talking to them. We also have time pressured questions. So we give the students 10 seconds. Obviously, in emergency, you don't have all the time in the world. You don't wander off and speak to people or look in a book. So they have time pressured questions, 10 seconds to answer these questions. And then it is personalized. So we've used branching. We filmed it in a way that the selection a student makes for the answer determines the path that scenario takes. So these scenarios are branched. And then the students get feedback both from the actor, you'll see when you have a go, but also they'll get individual feedback such as you scored 60%, and then their individual answers and feedback has gone through within the headsets. Okay, so as Andrea mentioned, this was a big collaboration with the fantastic team at the DML, many of whom are here in case you have questions later on. There were three main phases to this. So there was the pre-production element, the production, and the post-production. I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who's going to talk a bit more about that.
Okay. Thank you, Rashika. So as we've already said, the DML are actually here and probably better placed than I am to answer a lot of these questions, but even so. So the process in pre-production is effectively initially script writing, which is done by Rashika and the teaching fellows. We then work hand in hand with the DML producers and camera team to refine that process and effectively come up with a storyboard. And what's been very effective is flow diagrams to help with the 360 process because there is branching. Moving on from this, we're looking at actors and effectively scouting for sets as well. In the production phase, effectively, once the location is acquired, we're now looking at setting up a 360 camera and the sound and also lighting. Because it's filmed in 360, the team has to effectively leave the room and set up a wireless environment to be able to see what's happening. And then after this, in the post-production element, basically the video is stitched together and color corrected, sound is added, and then the 3D elements and the photogrammetry that we've used are all come together into an engine, Games Engine Unreal, and which in turn the interactions are also added and the whole thing is packaged for headset.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I'll log on in a second, but it's now your turn to have a go. So just to make you aware, these are usually delivered to students through their individual VR headsets. So a very immersive experience. You're going to see it as a desktop version. You're going to see a cardiac arrest scenario. We've adapted the questions once we give our students. So it's a bit more accessible, and there will be interactive questions. So you can see you've got your phones, but if you can, it will be through Mentimeter. If you can take a picture of the QR code, please. You will have 20 rather than 10 seconds to answer each question. And the path, if you remember, I said it was branched. So the path we will take is the path with the most votes. And that's the path that the scenario will take. So I'm just going to, I'll just go to sort this out. So I can see quite a lot. I'll just wait for everybody to join. So just whilst we wait, this is just a test question. So heart stops in hospital, what is their chance of survival to discharge? So that's the percentage chance that they will live to discharge if their heart would stop in hospital. If everyone can start voting, please. I will set timer. I mean, we'll give 20 seconds for the real thing. Okay. So a range of answers. The correct answer is about 20%. It can be a bit less depending on other issues, frailty, rhythm their heart was in, for instance. But I can see you're all voting, which is good. So Adrian, you can begin.
We've got around 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any other patients to discuss in the meantime?
Yes, please. I've got an 82-year-old female patient I want an opinion on. The patient number is...
Thought I'd find you in here. The lady we saw, I'm so sorry, you're on the X-ray meeting. I'll be really quick. The lady we saw on 4 South yesterday looks considerably worse. Is there any way you can...
Brilliant. So everyone chose the answer C, which is to immediately attend the cardiac arrest. So we will take that part.
I just don't understand what's happened. He was literally having a chat with us an hour ago. He had his endoscopy and we didn't notice anything after. The doctors even saw him after the stroke and they didn't mention any issues.
Okay. So the majority answer here for what more information is how, so it's option C, how long chest compression has been taking place. So that's the partial take.
He doesn't have a DNA CPR in place, so I've just been doing chest compressions for around a minute. He lives alone and the next of kin is his daughter Sarah. From my understanding, he's quite independent and manages fine on his own. And his daughter pops in once every few days. There's a past medical history.
Oh gosh, is this Mr. Smith? He was waiting for his endoscopy. I literally saw him this morning and he was fine.
I know it's terrible. He's had his endoscopy. Oh, I'm so sorry. You probably don't know this patient. I'm Roberta, by the way. This is Mr. Smith. He was admitted after an episode of Melina. The HCA Hannah found him unresponsive at his bed a few minutes ago. Tried looking, but I couldn't scan the pulse, so I've just been doing chest compressions since.
Okay, listen, just continue with the chest compressions. Has anyone gone to go get a crash trolley?
Yeah, the HCA went to go here. By the way, how long do I do compressions for?
Okay. So majority answer here is 2 minutes, so we'll go down that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's make sure we're doing 2 minutes of test compressions. Thank you. Would you like me to get anything from it? Can we get the defibrillator pads out of the trolley? Yeah. Let me know if you need any help with compression. Sure.
Sorry, we're late, we've just got another call in here. I'm Alex, medical registrar, this is Tina, for anaesthetist. Tom's got your name.
Yeah, so this is Mr. Smith, he was admitted with me a day ago and we've been awaiting for the investigation. He has the doctor So he's had about 2 minutes. He's right. Before I finish, I'm going to make some question. I'm just going to get my answer now.
Okay, thank you. Lead now, if everyone is happy with that. Tunav, you okay to manage the airways, please? Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you. So we've had 2 minutes of compressions, deeply pads are in place. So let's do a rhythm check, please. Stop compression. Okay, what's the monitor show?
What's the copy of this?
Okay, I can't see. What does the cardiac monitor show? What rhythm are you?
Okay. So just by a narrow margin, D, ventricular fibrillation, is the option that's been chosen.
Please, let me help you out. That looks like pulseless electrical activity to me.
Okay, so pulseless electrical activity isn't shockable, so resume compression, please. As soon as we've got IV access, we should get some adrenaline on board. Actually, it looks like it's firing out. Hannah, would you be able to take over, please?
Yes, of course. Take over if you count me down from 3. Sure. 3, 2, 1, and take over now.
Thank you. Roberta, would you be able to get another radio? The same time, get a set of bloods, please.
What's a minute?
A full set of bloods, including FBC and renal function, I want you to be in charge of timing, please. So 2 minutes for compressions. Have you got a watch?
Yes, I do.
Right, so whilst we're getting bloods, 2 minutes of compressions, let's run through the reversible causes through the 4 H's and 4 T's.
Okay, thank you. So the most popular option is option A, which is all of the below.
Okay, let's start with the H's. So we've got hypoxia and hypokalemia or hyperkalemia. A blood gas should give us these quickly. Roberta, would you be able to get a blood gas while you're down there, please?
I'm so sorry, everyone, but I'm really struggling to get some blood. Would anyone be able to help?
Yeah, I can help. Okay, in the meantime, let's keep working through the H's and T's.
Okay, so we've got hypo and hypothermia, and we've got hypovolemia.
Guys, it might be useful information, but lots of blood.
You need to get these to the bottom of the 1 minute. Losses immediately. As for the temperature, we've seen fine at 37.8.
It's been 2 minutes, by the way.
Thank you. Stop compressions. Still no pulse, what's the rhythm show?
Still looks like pulses electrical activity.
Okay, restart compressions. So we've had 4 minutes. Let's get the adrenaline on board. Thank you. Roberta, can you get the adrenaline?
At the bottom, I've just seen it.
Oh, no. It's bad, it's like. I'm full of adrenaline. You can sit up and start walking.
So the most popular option was B, 1 in 1,000.
I already have to do this.
Oh, no, let's not do that. Can we make sure we give the 1 in 10,000 dose of the adrenaline? Yes, that's right. That's the right one. Shall I give it now? Yes, please. There we go. I've given the adrenaline.
Thank you. We've got the results for the blood gas yet.
Not yet. Oh, I've got some on the gas. Let me go check where they are.
Thank you very much. Are you okay with the compressions?
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's keep running through the reversible causes.
We've got on team toxins.
Thank you. So does anyone know if this patient has taken any drugs or medications?
I've got the blood gas with me. Do you mind having a look?
Okay, thank you. So the most popular option there was a mixed metabolic and respiratory acidosis, option C.
Okay, so yes, that's correct, actually. The patient's quite hypoxic, they've got a low hemoglobin level, and it looks like they've got mixed metabolic and respiratory acidosis.
Okay, so the hemoglobin levels are very likely they're low because of the blood loss. We can still wait until the blood's shown. Are you okay with the?
Yeah, not fine. Been 2 minutes, by the way.
Okay, stop compressions. What does the monitor show?
Wait, it looks like we've got a return of electrical activity. Could you check your bill?
You have a pulse. So we've got a return of circulation. Well done, everyone.
Oh, what a relief. That's so stressful.
Okay, Tina, are you okay to review this patient for critical care, please?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your help.
Bianca, can you order a chest X-ray, please?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay, I will speak to the family.
I'm just going to clear up here and take them. Thank you.
Okay, we also make sure we check the patient's blood and contact. Just make sure it's a transfusion.
I'll do that. Oh, have you got more of it, okay?
Very easy to would you be able to help out with
Yeah,
clerking
sure.
when you're done tidying up a bit? Thank you. Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, so the score there was 4 out of 7, which is really very good. I was impressed with the blood gas one. So in terms of the feedback for the students, it's a different layout for them. They see the answer that they get and then they see their answer. Adrian, how do I pause this? Right, so just wait. So the first, just to quickly run through the questions, it's in case you're interested. So of course you should attend immediately. Cardiac arrest is one of those things that we run to, and then there's medical emergencies, which we sometimes run to or walk very fast to. The second question about the history of the patient. So the question I asked at the beginning about the 20%. So 20% of patients, when their heart stops in hospital will be alive to discharge. And the various factors that make this, make the figure slightly higher or lower than that is how frail they are as a baseline, how long. So if you've done chest compressions for a long time, there's a lot of brain injury because there's been no oxygen to the brain, so that can affect outcomes. So various factors, but in that question, all of the above were important, or below were important. Chest compressions are performed for 2 minutes, after which you stop, you check the rhythm, and then you look at the pulse. So there's 2 types of rhythm we're interested in: shockable rhythms, which you often see on TV, but they're actually the rarer ones, and the non-shockable ones. So in this one, we didn't shock. The next question, so yes, it was pulseless electrical activity. So you could see electrical activity on the monitor, but when you feel for a pulse, there was no pulse. So it wasn't sustaining any meaningful activity for the patient. Yes, so we use the 4 H's and the 4 T's as an aid memoir to remember all the reasons the heart can stop. That's things like lack of oxygen, lack of volume, toxins, a big clot. So those would be the main causes, and we go through that every cardiac arrest. We give adrenaline, so every time someone's heart stops, whether it be a rhythm that you're going to shock or not shock, we always give adrenaline. Yeah, so this blood gas, I wish I could go through it, but it's really helpful. It's taken either from the wrist or the groin from an artery rather than the usual blood test you're used to from your veins. And it gives you a really important information of the acid-base balance of the patient, which can give you a lot of clues as to what caused the cardiac arrest in the first place. So that's the end. Thank you. We'll just move back to the slides. Okay, so the way that we deliver these sessions, we start with, it is a very typical simplified style actually. So we start with a group introduction where we talk about what we're going to do, try and establish what their knowledge base is at the beginning. As I said, we deliver it to 60 students and we've done it for year 5 and year 6 this year. They then have their individual experience within the headset. So cardiac arrest was one of our first scenarios. So we weren't quite sure how far we could push these boundaries. We've subsequently done life-threatening asthma, life-threatening epilepsy, life-threatening diabetes, and even angry family, which is not life-threatening, but it's important for them to know. And we've sort of pushed the boundaries with those ones. So you can see here we've branched, but we weren't sure how much we could branch. So it's quite sort of no, oh yes, that's correct. But the other branching, for instance, for the asthma, if you fail to give oxygen when you do, the patient deteriorates much faster and it has more consequence. So they have their individual simulation experience with their individual feedback, and then they take their, and that's about 15 minutes. They take their headset off and then they have a big group debrief. And what we find actually is that this works really well because the quieter, it suits lots of learning styles. The quieter students tend to come out and speak a lot. So there's a lot of chat in the group debrief because they've already made their mistakes within the headset. So they're not embarrassed to say things because they actually know the right answers now. So it's quite, you know, it makes for a good group debrief. Any life-threatening emergency obviously requires some knowledge, but a lot of it is actually non-technical skills. So in the group debrief, we talk a lot about the non-technical skills of leadership, teamwork, because in this, they are playing the role of a junior doctor, but you saw there were other people calling the shots more. So, you know, there's leadership, there's teamwork. You have to understand where you slot into the team. And that's the difficulty when you first arrive at an emergency and you're very junior, you've never seen one. You don't actually know what you're supposed to be doing there. But there's very clear roles for everybody. That's, you know, once you've done it once or twice, you know that's your role. And as you go through the grades, you know your role changes slightly. So we talk a lot about the non-technical skills as well. We use this phrase in medicine. I don't know if it's familiar to everyone, but bench to bedside. So the way that we had this idea and then took it to the students rather than the patient's bedside. So In August 2021, we identified the problem, which was that our students felt underprepared for practice, but particularly in emergencies and identifying and managing them. We then worked on scripting, and at that time we were just doing the two, life-threatening asthma and cardiac arrest. And then in January to May 2022, we worked on a collaborative solution with the Digital Media Lab, which involved those three processes. In May 2022, we introduced it in a sort of research trial element to our students. So they were on their pre-foundation year assistantship. So they finished finals, they were going to become a doctor, but they had a few weeks where they went into hospital kind of doing the nitty-gritty groundwork stuff. So we ran our sessions to them. We also built research into that. So we did some eye tracking, heart rate monitoring, and various other qualitative measures of engagement and enjoyment. And then we actioned, there was lots of feedback from that. So we actioned all that in a month. And then we rolled it out to year 5 and year 6 students on emergency as they rotated through emergency medicine. So they have now had these sessions. Over 700 students will have had these virtual reality sessions in this academic year. Of course, there is often feedback that comes back from those sessions. For instance, there was a scene that was actually too long and boring at the beginning that we cut out. It was just, we realized it was pointless. It wasn't adding anything, and the students felt back that they didn't really understand the point of that scene. It was an intro scene, so we cut that out. We tried to build in some interaction, which kept jamming, so we cut that out. So, you know, we acted on the feedback that was given even throughout. So what did the students say? So 92% of the students enjoyed the sessions, 93% felt engaged, 97.5% felt it met their learning requirements, and they felt significantly more confident in identifying and managing cardiac arrest and asthma, which to us, you know, is a great achievement. So some of the written feedback. So, you know, a year 6 student. So as a medical student, you don't often feel recognised in the team. So they like that you get opportunities that you would not usually get in real life. So that's really important because they don't usually see this in real life, the majority of them. I enjoyed being able to partake without looking stupid when I got stuff wrong. So again, this was a frequent bit of feedback from students. They found this safe space in the headset where they could make decisions without peer judgment, and then they could participate really fruitfully in the group discussion later. I felt that I was useful to the medical team and that the patient depended on my answer. So again, the branching meant that they felt that they were actually, obviously in real life, no medical student influences the management of a patient. So this is quite a unique position for them to be in. So yeah, you know, we were pleased with the engagement and enjoyment. They gained confidence in identifying and managing those particular emergencies. It also brought a sort of democracy to practice. So, you know, rather than just a few students having this experience by being at a particular place at a particular time, or having a very kind, you know, consultant who included them, all our students could feel prepared for practice. The sessions are scalable. So I mentioned before that, you know, typically in-person simulation, 2 students, 2 facilitators, 1 hour. Our sessions for cardiac arrest was 1 hour with 60 students and 2 facilitators. So in terms of scalability, it was much better, so you can use it more often. So for the academic year that's going to start soon, they will be having cardiac arrest, life-threatening asthma, and angry family as well, just in a sort of 2.5 hour session. Our resources are very shareable. So we are building this package, as I said, with various conditions, including epilepsy and life-threatening diabetes, and also an upper GI bleed. And they will be shared nationally via Health Education England because there's lots of interested parties. So it means no one has to repeat this process. It's a video file that can be shared. They can look at it on a desktop. It's better with a VR headset. So we've had lots of positive publicity, which is nice. So in terms of the future, so our students have fed back they want more hands-on interaction. So we hadn't done that at first because it was all very new to us, but also we didn't want to remove from the realism. but actually there are some things where they can part from realism slightly, some practical tasks like setting up a blood transfusion. So our GI bleed and our life-threatening diabetes emergencies have more hands-on interaction. So where you see questions, we're moving towards actual interaction where they can lift and do things. Moving into challenging conversations. So as I mentioned, we've completed Angry Family, and we're also looking at, so again, situations that are not emergencies, but that students are not typically exposed to. We don't send them in to speak to an angry family. We don't send them in to speak to a family of a dying patient, for instance. That just doesn't happen until they qualify. And then we've been approached for various collaborations. So one of our current ones is with dentistry, which we don't have at Imperial, but Queen Mary's and via Health Education England, who are also interested in our work. So we're collaborating on something joint with them. Obviously, none of this would be possible without the amazing team that we have, which is very extensive, but we've really enjoyed working collaboratively with the DML and others. And we're very thankful for the funding from the Digital Innovation Fund and also from Health Education England. We welcome any questions.
Thanks, that was fantastic. Question about the experience we just had was collaborative. If you're in a room with 60 of your peers and you all have headsets on, is it a bespoke experience for everyone? So I'm making choices and that's determining the branching. Yeah. And Jolene Blows next to me having a completely different experience.
Yeah. So that's it. Yeah, you will have a different experience depending on what you choose.
Okay. The other thing is, and a tremendous amount of work went into that. And I know the thing with branching, even if you do a text-based branching quiz, it can take a long, long time. So for this thing, how long did the videoing process take? Was it over a few days or? Yeah,
it was about 4 or 5 days. One day was a rehearsal day, and then the rest was filming. But you're absolutely right that the branching is long and tedious as well, and also because every time you branch you need to have continuity. So so if someone's hand was like this, then it has to be like that in every single branch, and if there's a bit of blood here. So working with the DML, because they're so brilliant at production, we tried to get that balance with not too much branching and variation, but enough to make the student feel like they've made a decision, but also to make it this not this impossibly long process.
But doing it in scenes will really have helped that, won't it? So you have the question pop up and you've not necessarily got to have that much continuity, just everyone in roughly at the same position, because the question's in your face and then it disappears.
Yeah. I mean, we have tried to, I don't know if the DML want to chip in, but we have tried to keep it the continuity, even though the question flicks up, we've kind of ignored the question. It's not that people are, the implication is not that people are moving around whilst the question is happening. It's like they've stood still. So we do keep that continuity.
And what was the ratio of actors to clinicians in that?
In that particular one, it was, I think there were probably 5 people in the scene, 2 of which were clinicians.
Very convincing.
Hi, thanks. I had a question. So with the branching, if we got the answers wrong, does it just carry on with the wrong answer? Or I kind of noticed at one point it seemed like they were like, oh no, let's give 10,000, not 1,000. So does it sort of course correct? Yeah. In the video? Is that how you sort of deal with the wrong answer?
Yeah, so this one, it was much more of a no, let's not do that, let's do this. And so it's immediately corrected because it was our first one. For life-threatening asthma, there is one example question is they're asked, how much oxygen or should I give oxygen? And some people might say no, or to give a tiny bit when they should be giving a lot. And then the scene plays for about maybe 2 more scenes before someone says, why is this patient deteriorating? And someone says, oh, well, I gave them this minuscule amount of oxygen. And then they say, no, you should have given X amount. So it does eventually correct. It all eventually comes back to the same point, either immediately or after 1 or 2 scenes.
So what's the rationale for not knowing if you were wrong when you completed it? I guess that's what I was slightly confused, because sometimes I felt like I was guessing. And is it more that that's the conversation afterwards where you talk through what it was supposed to be? Because I guess sometimes I didn't quite know.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different if you have, so if it was individual to you. So we try and, so if you'd chosen the wrong answer here and I can't even think of a question, but if you'd chosen the wrong dose of adrenaline, immediately as the scene comes back, she'll say, no, actually, we can't give that. We need to give this much. But to try and make it less, to make it a bit more authentic for asthma, it's sometimes after 1 or 2 scenes that you realise that you've made the wrong mistake, because the doctor or somebody will turn to you and say, no, we should have given this much, but you sort of done it 2 scenes ago. So we've tried to mix it up, but gradually as we've got more confident, the branching has become much more authentic.
Thank you.
So even the wrong answer cannot kill the patient here.
Yeah, I mean, all the patients end up in the same place in our scenario. They want to destroy the student.
Ultimately, do we all, right?
Hi, it's a really wonderful piece of teaching. How do you think, or have you done any work to really get insight to how this compares in terms of giving medical students that confidence versus the in-person actor scenario or other alternatives? You know, how much the VR part makes a difference compared to just stop-start on a video 2D. Do you have any sort of sense of how those added features add confidence?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I mentioned the research study that we did. And so we compared this in a VR experience to a desktop version of the same thing. And the students either saw epilepsy or asthma in one or other. And we measured heart rate and eye tracking, as well as more qualitative things about their engagement and enjoyment, and also if you've heard Berry observation, where observers observe how independent observers observe how engaged the students look. And we found that their heart rate significantly went up compared to desktop. And studies suggest that about 5 beats per minute suggests that you're engaged or excited or something, you're having a reaction to the scenario at least. So their heart rate significantly went up. They were much more so they spent significantly more time looking on task. So we call it on task, actually looking at what they're supposed to be doing rather than staring into space and things, which is what would happen on a desktop. They'd often look away. And the students significantly enjoyed it and felt more engaged subjectively to the VR compared to the desktop version. So that was our study that we are in the process of sort of submitting.
More questions? Given that you have this desktop version, once your students have done the online VR headset one, can they take these scenarios home and do them again, practice, use them for revision?
It's a good point. We should do. Well, we had it more for the ones who were ill and didn't attend and that thing. But yeah, I mean, it would be great because we've developed 6 more scenarios. Our ideal setting is if the student could actually borrow, as you would a book, from the library, a VR headset, and just have a go in their own time, because they're it's obviously much better in this having the intro and the group debrief, but you could just do it yourself and still gain from it if you just popped it on and had a go, because you'll still get feedback from the headset itself.
And have you ever thought to create interaction between the students? For example, if they work in a group of 2 or 3 and can have interaction in VR?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good idea, and it's something we've considered. I don't know, Adrian, if you want to. It doesn't fully work in the problem. I'll let Adrian speak for it, but the problem that we have is that because we're trying to retain realism, if you start having multiple people, then it becomes more of a gamification, as in it's not really possible, easily possible in a 360 videoed scenario. But
just to add to that, yeah, multiplayer is not easy. Well, it's being worked on. They're working on it, and I'm sure, you know,
it's coming.
12 months, yes, it will be coming.
Okay.
Two facilitators, 60 headsets. Spill the beans. Some of the headsets must have gone wrong. You know what I mean? Because
it's a very refined process now.
Yeah. So we did, as I was saying, that continuous feedback process. So although we did it on the 150 students, and you know, we tried to give the best section possible, but in our head we were testing this to see how that still didn't reveal all the issues. That when we then rolled it out, we found that certain student behaviour, for instance, the frantic clickers, there was always a few in there that just go nuts on the clicker when something doesn't load immediately. It ended up jamming this particular scene that we just had to cut it because there were too many jams. And the problem with these, well, not the problem, but the issue we found is that if 5 students headset jams and then we have to restart and they put it back on whilst everybody else is continuing their scenario, they finish 5 minutes later than everybody else. So you're sitting in that position thinking, do I just carry on with the group tutorial whilst they're silently standing in the middle of the room with the headset on, or do we wait? So I think we decided overall that scene didn't bring enough value. So yeah, there have been many modifications. When you see it now, it's very refined. When we first did it in July, there were various, and we were also getting the student behaviour. And I think the thing that surprised me the most is, you know, these students are, 22, 23, 24 years old. I thought they would be really using headsets at home all the time, but it turned out that really they're not very familiar with them. And another thing that we had to introduce was a sort of airline style brief on how to actually use the headset and press this button and put it on and then, secure it in place like this. I didn't imagine we'd need that, so we didn't have that at the beginning, but we quickly realised the majority don't know how to use it. It just took 5 minutes extra to show them, so it wasn't a big process, but it made a huge difference to how fluid the scenario went.
Brilliant. And the choice of headsets really important, I suppose. You wouldn't do that on HoloLenses, would you?
No. So we've gone for a Pico, which is effectively an open source headset that's owned by ByteDance.
And a team somewhere making sure they're all plugged in.
Well, they have big trolleys, they're all charging, etc. So yeah, and part of that.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm a little bit biased, but any thoughts to expand it to other healthcare settings like in primary care and things, dealing with emergency?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We would be very happy to extend it. So as I said, we're sort of working with dentistry who do something similar. And Daniel, we all wanted to say, but it's quite involved, the process. So whilst we've really got it down to a T, it still remains involved. And so I guess the question I always ask before we do anything digitally is there any reason this can't be done in real life? Because there's lots of things when you're not training doctors that they just need to do it in real life. There's no point putting it digitally. They should just be doing a cannula. They should just be taking blood. There's no reason to do it digitally. So I guess these emergencies are an example where they're really not seeing this. They're not going to, if we don't do it, they're just not going to see it, and then that's it. So yeah, that's the sort of question I asked. But yeah, no, it can expand into any setting if they're not really seeing it in real life. But again, it's an involved process. So which is why when we're sharing through Health Education England, it just saves everyone else having to do it, and it's so easy to share.
Just to follow on from that as well, and this is obviously from the student's perspective. Have you thought about doing it from the patient's perspective?
Yeah, I mean that would also be a great thing. So you could the 360 camera where the patient would be. That's it's a great idea. Again, it's that question of where, you know, in what setting would it add value? And I'm sure there are that I haven't thought of. But yeah, you could put it in any setting. You could put it, you know, it's important that our students know how a nurse feels when you're sort of barking orders and things like that. You know, to just put it in lots of people's perspective would be a great thing. But I think we're just trying to sort of bring the value where it's most needed. But there's huge potential for
From
it.
the perspective of the angry family.
Angry Family is done as the junior doctor. So we're trying to prepare, you know, our role is quite specific to preparing them for practice. I mean, you know, anybody's welcome to have a go at our Angry Family or anything epilepsy. But yeah, so the Angry Family is an interesting one. We weren't sure how it was going to work because it's so communication driven, and the issue we have is that you can't speak. So the big downside is you put the VR headset on, you can do lots of things, and we can bring in touching and doing stuff with your hands if we wanted to, but you can't speak and get a reaction yet. It's something we're working on, but we didn't then know how the Angry Family would work if you can't actually speak, and the whole point is a comm skills. But it's worked really well just to feel that sense of, you know, multiple people in a room, and it's just you and the nurse, and, you know, people are angry, and you can feel that within a VR headset because you're in this sort of enclosed space. It feels quite realistic. But yeah, I mean, to switch roles is a great idea. Yeah, it is a great idea for our specific purpose of practice themselves. You know, we've kept it from their perspective. Any questions?
I think that's a really great session. I know you're evaluating this, and you're obviously your primary evaluation is going to be of the technology and of the teaching. But in your evaluation or your research, are you evaluating sort of larger scale implications, like your students' perception and appetite for risk, or their confidence and identity and how that develops? Because one of the things that I've been thinking is that one of the great things that the virtual reality supplies, even in the sort of more limited way we all experienced it, where you kindly gave us more time and we weren't in the three-dimensional reality, it was this feeling of, you know, if I get this wrong, something's going to happen. And so I wonder whether you've got any plans to evaluate or research those sort of aspects.
I mean, it's not something I've thought of, but you're right. An appreciation and developing a relationship with risk is vital in the clinical setting. I mean, it's just ongoing, and nothing we do is risk free, because often, you know, patients, even on a basic level, will say, well, does this drug have any side effects? And you're saying, well, every drug has side effects, and you go, so nothing we do is risk free. That would be a brilliant idea. So everything that we do, so for Angry Patient or the new interactions, we do build research into it, and before we kind of, and then that's how we make our modifications. So I think an appreciation of their relationship with risk would be brilliant, and it's something, yeah, that we'll take on board.
Rishika, Adrian, thank you so much for this presentation and giving us the opportunity to experience one of your VR scenarios. It's been wonderful. And one more round of applause, everyone.
So I start by thanking Michelle and Adrian for a great presentation. And I guess my job is to tie things up and finish things off. So I'll start with thanks rather than ending with them. So thanks particularly to Prof. Adshah for this morning's keynote, which set us off. And even before that, for the organisation that put all of this together. So for Tiffany and Richard and the team at EDU and Chairs and all of the admin that supported all of this, everybody who presented in the conference today and who helped to coordinate and mediate those presentations and get us in the right place. Thanks very much for all of that effort. Thanks also for people who produced a great set of posters, which were all really interesting. And I need to remind you that if you haven't voted for your favourite poster, there's still time to do so. And I'd encourage you to do that because I'm reliably told there's a surprise bundle of goodies, which, given that as the boss, I'm likely to be paying for out of our budget, I'm hoping it's not too big a box of goodies, but I'm sure it'll be worth winning. And there'll be fresh posters up for tomorrow's session as well. So please vote for today's and look again at tomorrow's. So to think more about what today was about and try and draw some things together. So when Peter kicked us off this morning, he very kindly reassured us that college was still interested in this stuff and that the learning and teaching strategy was moving forward and that there's, hopefully a good future for all of this. And one of the things he said was that this festival links very strongly to the priorities of the revised learning and teaching strategy. So today's focus was on discovery-based learning. Tomorrow's is on assessment and feedback. And the third day is on one of the major factors that is linked into the strategy, which is well-being and a sense of belonging. So for today, it was all about discovery. And I think this last session that we've just sat through is a really good example of how, if you think innovatively, you can really discover stuff. And even though that was a sort of relatively managed version of this 360 virtual reality, I discovered a lot in that session. I got quite involved in it. One of the main things I discovered was that despite many years of teaching cardiology to medical students, I'm definitely not safe to be doing it clinically in that pressured situation. There's a big difference, as it turns out, between teaching the mechanics and electrics of the heart and actually helping someone recover from a cardiac event. I guess the other thing that maybe I discovered was that perhaps it's just because my cardiology is now very much out of date, and I like to think I might be better at dealing with the angry family now that I'm doing educational stuff. So maybe my skill set's changed. Going back to Prof. Adshah's keynote this morning, he said loads of really interesting things, but a couple of things that stood out to me. One was the very positive links he made between discovery-based learning and students discovering things for themselves with a bit of space and agency to do that, with a bit of control in that. The strong links he made between that and innovation and creativity. That really stood out to me. We often say we want to be innovative in our teaching. We want our students to be innovative. And then we take all of their time up giving them stuff to do without giving them the space and agency to actually learn, to risk and to be innovative. The other, I think, potentially interesting things that he talked about was that in that creativity and in that innovation, diversity helps to fuel that. And that's another thing that if we are more traditionally thinking about our teaching, we tend to try and work to a mean, try and get students to be all at the same place at the same time. And whilst that might make the process easier for them and for us, actually, perhaps we're not giving them enough space to use their diversity and to add their different perspectives into the mix. So I think all of those things were very well illustrated in this last demonstration that we've all been involved with, where those headsets, although they are removed from reality, they are authentic enough to give each person their own view, their own power to make the decisions in a way that they couldn't possibly do in real life. And I think that's why I asked the question about risk, because it seems to me that one of the huge benefits of that is that it gives the students space to take a risk. And it goes back to what Prof. Ancha was saying this morning about learning to fail positively and quickly and in a way that helps to drive development and learning and change. So this whole festival is about transformation. And I think as we're trying to transform students' identities and understanding, it's really important that we recognise that that transformation is almost never easy. It's almost never completely neutral and without emotional repercussions. And we need to think about ways of recognising that and using it in an educationally positive way, not trying to control it out of our teaching and making it bland and neutral and safe. Because the real world isn't bland and neutral and safe. And our teaching needs to prepare our students for that real world. So one of the other things that came out of this morning's keynote is the perhaps predictable links between what seemed to be pressures that argued against this idea of creativity in terms of how did, one of the questions that the keynote was asked was, how did he reconcile our propensity in modern higher education to design everything with intended learning outcomes and give the students space to be creative? And my answer to that, having reflected on it and with the benefit of hindsight and having sat through lots of other interesting presentations, there's a one this morning particularly that helped me with this about inflection. Maybe what we need to do is not ignore the structure of learning outcomes, but get better at writing them about the right things. So learning outcomes only get in the way of creativity if the learning outcomes are written about the facts and the figures and the content. If we get more brave ourselves and take a risk ourselves as designers and teachers, we can write our learning outcomes about things that really matter, which is not so much about the facts. I'm not saying the facts aren't important, they clearly are, but what really matters is how our students understand and engage with those facts. So perhaps we just need to get better at writing better learning outcomes so that we can give ourselves the space to discover some innovative teaching to help our students really transform and develop. The last thing that I want to mention before I finish up is the other predictable thing that came out of this morning's keynote, which was inevitably we ended up talking about generative AI and how that might interact with things. And there are questions that we as a sector need to answer about generative AI. And lots of those are about how do we assess? How do we assess understanding if what we might be doing is assessing not understanding, but what prompts someone put into something like ChatGPT, or even worse, God forbid, whether they have access to ChatGPT 5.3, the expensive version, or do they still only have access to the free version? That would be an awful thing if that's what we're actually assessing. Again, I think for me, having reflected on it and seen so many great presentations today, what I find myself thinking is that actually, much like the learning outcomes question, the challenge we have is not how to combat generative AI. That tool is out there, it's in the real world. It's how do we get better, not at assessing written answers as a surrogate indicator of understanding, but assessing understanding more directly. And if someone's being assessed by being asked to reflect on something, sure, they might use ChatGPT to structure that answer, to structure that reflection. But we just got to get better at then talking to them about that. Nobody ever gets a PhD without doing a Viva. For that same reason, we need to check their understanding by having a real conversation with a real person. Now, I know that has a big resource implication, but I don't see this as a reason to do even more assessment. I see it as a really good reason to do even less assessment of the right stuff at the right time, so that we use the technology to help our students learn, and as this last demonstration showed, to give them a chance to risk in a safe way and to practice being wrong and learning from being wrong. And then we save our resources to assess in an integrated, joined up way where we can really directly assess their understanding. And on that note, I will finish by saying tomorrow's day of the festival is going to have probably even more about ChatGPT because it's focused on assessment and feedback all day. And so I thank you for your participation today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another day